You don't forget your car keys because you're just tired. You forget them because your brain is quietly surrendering one slip at a time to seven memory mistakes that begin stealing your mind after 60. And the first is one you never saw coming. Passive recall, the silent killer of memory strength, where you tell yourself, I'll remember it later, but later never comes. And every time you do that, you shrink your hippocampus's grip on the detail until it dissolves, leaving you wondering when the erosion started. It's this casual self-trust in your fading mental to-do list that opens the door to mistake too habitual repetition without variation, because you might think doing the same puzzle, walking the same path, or solving the same crossword keeps you sharp. But your brain sees it as déjà vu, coasting through the motions, like a factory worker pressing the same button over and over. Until cognition dulls into autopilot and the spark of neuroplasticity dies out unnoticed like a candle burning out in a closed room. And here's where mistake three creeps in. You stop challenging the beliefs you formed decades ago, allowing cognitive rigidity to thicken like mental plaque, turning your thoughts into echo chambers that reward familiarity over truth, and by refusing to wrestle with uncomfortable questions or opposing views. You starve your prefrontal cortex of what it craves, most novelty, ambiguity, friction. And what's worse is that mistake four disguises itself as wisdom over reliance on routine. That seductive sense of control you cling to as you age, when in truth it's suffocating your adaptability, dulling your situational awareness, and slowly stripping you of the flexibility needed to respond to the unexpected. Which brings us to mistake five, the most dangerous of all neglecting emotional memory. Those flashes of joy, grief, embarrassment, and pride that anchor your identity because as you grow older and tuck your feelings away to stay calm or appear wise, you slowly erase the very color palette your brain uses to organize and recall meaning. And when you downplay your emotions, your memories decay into grayscale shadows with no scent, no taste, no grip, and so the decades behind you begin to blur together like fog creeping over a field of forgotten yesterdays. While mistake six tightens the noose, ignoring micronutrient depletion, especially B12, omega-3s, and magnesium, which quietly dictate the speed and stability of your neural signals. It's not about feeling tired, it's about the erosion of connection between memory cells that once fired like lightning and now flicker like dying bulbs. And as mistake seven takes hold, the deadliest of all social withdrawal, that gentle retreat from conversation, conflict, and vulnerability, you slowly disconnect from the external prompts your memory relies on to stay sharp. Because memory is not a private vault. It's a living conversation with your environment. And when you isolate the reminders, the questions, the laughter, the cues, they all vanish and your mind becomes an archive with no librarian, no index, no return path to who you were. And if you've already seen pieces of yourself slipping, lost names, missing dates, vanishing intentions, know this. These seven mistakes don't just steal your memories. They rewrite the story of your life in invisible ink. And the only way to stop the fading is to disrupt the decay. Deliberately challenge your assumptions ruthlessly and treat your mind not as a storage unit, but as a garden that only thrives when stirred, fed, and awakened by your refusal to drift quietly into forgetfulness. Would you dare remember who you truly are before the forgetting finishes its work? You think forgetting your neighbor's name is just a slip, a harmless sign of age, but it's the whisper of a deeper decay beginning quietly beneath your confidence. And it starts with mistake number one, trusting that your memory will catch you when you fall. When in truth, your brain is already dropping stitches in the fabric of your identity. And every time you rely on mental recall without reinforcement, without writing it down, repeating it out loud, or tying it to something meaningful, you're letting your brain believe that information doesn't matter, that it's expendable. And so it flushes it away, not because it's weak, but because you told it to by doing nothing. And this silent agreement to forget is what lays the first stone in the road to mental decline, where names become faces, birthdays become seasons, and plans become vague intentions that never quite materialize. And while you tell yourself it's normal, you're missing the secret your memory is trying to keep from you. That neglect is a command and your brain obeys. But it doesn't stop there, because mistake two is more comfortable, more subtle, and far more deadly repetition without challenge. You take the same walk, solve the same word puzzles, talk to the same people about the same things, and somewhere in that sameness, your brain stops caring. It stops wiring, it stops growing. You were told that routine is safety, but it's also starvation. Your neurons crave surprise, stress, ambiguity, friction. The easy tasks, the predictable conversations, the habits that require no thought, they're the equivalent of junk food for your mind, and slowly, without a single warning sign, they atrophy your brain's sharpness, making every new idea feel heavier than the last. You notice yourself reaching for simpler words, struggling to describe your thoughts, feeling slow in conversations not because your brain is failing you, but because you've stopped asking it to stretch. And when you stop stretching, mistake three moves in the belief that what you know is enough. Cognitive rigidity. It's the most polite kind of decay, the kind that says you've earned your views while quietly hardening the walls around them until you stop absorbing anything new. You stop asking questions, you reject confusion, and in doing so, you lose the one skill that protects long-term mental clarity, flexibility. It's not intelligence that keeps minds sharp into their 80s and 90s. It's the willingness to learn to unlearn, to feel awkward, to be wrong, and in your quiet refusal to face discomfort, you shut the door on growth. That door slams hardest when mistake four arrives, emotional neglect. You suppress your feelings to stay calm, mature, and control. But those feelings are how your brain bookmarks memories. Think about it, you remember the most embarrassing thing you ever said in high school, but not what you had for dinner 3 days ago. Why? Because emotion creates permanence. Without emotional engagement, your days blur, your stories lose color, and worst of all, your identity begins to fade because it's not being updated with real felt experience. You become a collection of facts instead of a living memory, and soon even those facts begin to scatter. That's when mistake five tightens its grip, social withdrawal. It starts innocently. You avoid loud places, skip the phone call, take more walks alone. But soon your brain is starved of the one thing it can't simulate: human unpredictability. Conversations, eye contact, laughter, disagreements. All of them are mental exercise firing neurons in ways that puzzles and books cannot. And when you lose that, you lose the scaffolding that holds your memory in place. You stop being reminded, questioned, teased, surprised. And those moments are what stitch your life together. Then mistake six quietly poisons the roots of your mind. Nutritional erosion. You eat less snack, more. Forget the supplements, shrug off fatigue as aging. And all the while your brain is starving for B vitamins, healthy fats, magnesium, and water. Yes, even mild dehydration can shrink your brain and sabotage short-term memory. You don't feel it immediately, but like termites in a beam, it weakens everything over time until you're forgetting. Not because you're old, but because your brain is underfed, underpowered, and chemically unbalanced. And if this all feels like too much to think about, it's because mistake seven has already arrived. Mental laziness disguised as peace. You avoid new technology, resist learning names. Let others handle details and tell yourself it's simpler that way. But that simplicity is costing you the very thing that defines you. Memory doesn't fade because of age alone. It fades when you stop fighting for it. When you stop taking the small daily risks that keep your neural pathways alive. When you stop turning toward the sharp corners of life and instead float in the soft, familiar comfort of repetition. And each of these seven memory mistakes, subtle, seductive, and slow, don't just make you forgetful. They rewrite your story, erasing your clarity, your personality, your fire. But here's the secret. No one tells you memory loss isn't a sentence. It's a signal, a wake-up call. And if you still recognize that something is slipping, it means you're still holding the rope. What you do next determines whether you climb or let go. Will you disrupt the silence before your memories dissolve into static? And you might think that simply trying harder is enough, that if you focus more or think more deeply, your memory will return. But effort without strategy is mistake eight. The mental treadmill where you run but go nowhere. And the truth is, your brain isn't just a vault, it's an ecosystem. And every careless habit you ignore is like throwing shade on the roots, blocking the growth you desperately need. You notice this when you forget not just facts but feelings. Why you entered a room, what that song used to mean, or the name of that childhood friend who once made you laugh so hard you cried and it feels like standing in your own house and not recognizing the furniture. But mistake 9 is the one that builds in secret over decades: chronic sleep neglect. Not just the hours you sleep, but the quality, the depth, the rhythm. Because your brain files and protects memories during deep sleep, like a night shift librarian sorting fragile books. And every night you cut corners, staring at screens, taking late caffeine, skipping routines, you allow errors, overlaps, and gaps to sneak into your recall. And slowly a name becomes a tip-of-the-tongue mystery. A memory turns into a vague fog, and you convince yourself that you're just not sleeping well lately, when the truth is your mind is drowning in unfinished business, unrepaired memories, and unprocessed thoughts. And mistake 10 is believing that's okay. Because what's truly dangerous after 60 isn't forgetting, it's normalizing forgetting. It's telling yourself that this is what happens to everyone, that you're just following the script of aging, when in fact you're writing that script with every choice you make. And mistake 11 plays right into that script, ignoring visual memory. You stop noticing details: the shade of the curtain, the route you walk, the face of the new cashier, not because your eyes are failing, but because you've stopped looking. Real looking, not glancing. You go on autopilot and your brain, always trying to be efficient, deletes what it thinks you don't care about. It trims the film of your life down to the basics. Get there, eat this, say that. And in the process, your sense of place, time, and depth begins to flatten. You feel like days blur together. It's not because they're uneventful, it's because your attention wasn't fully present to stitch them into memory. Mistake 12, thinking multitasking helps. You try to do 3 things at once, thinking it keeps your brain active, but it actually divides your attention into shallow fragments, none of which go deep enough to take root. You read while texting, listen while planning, talk while worrying, and what results is not stimulation, but fragmentation. Your memory doesn't just weaken, it splinters. You remember partial things, scattered things, and you start second-guessing everything. You feel less confident, less capable, not because your intelligence has faded, but because your attention is bleeding from 1,000 tiny cuts. And mistake 13 waits right behind that weakness: learned helplessness. That quiet resignation that says, why bother you, forget something, get embarrassed, and start pulling back. You stop speaking up, stop learning names, stop volunteering, all in the name of protecting yourself. And what you don't realize is that you're training your brain to believe it's failing even when it's not. This belief becomes its own decay. The less you trust your memory, the less your brain invests in holding on to anything, and the slide becomes faster, quieter, easier. You begin to sit out your own life. But the most painful mistake, mistake 14, is letting go of curiosity. Not the surface level kind, but the deep hunger that used to drive you to ask why, to explore new places, to try new things, to read late into the night, just because you had to know. When that curiosity fades, when it's replaced by indifference, by comfort, by the illusion of knowing enough, your memory has no reason to stay alive. The brain is a mirror of desire, and when desire fades, memory follows. Not because it has to, but because it thinks you no longer care. That is the slowest, cruelest death of all, but you're not there yet. If you're still reading this, something in you still fights, still burns, still remembers who you once were and who you refuse to become. So the question isn't whether your memory will fade. It's whether you will fade with it or fight, because this war isn't won with pills or puzzles or passive hope. It's won with radical disruption, by choosing the hard road, the uncomfortable question, the new skill, the vulnerable conversation, the difficult emotion. Every day you choose friction over comfort, your memory rewrites itself. You rebuild the bridges, you reignite the patterns. You don't have to go quietly. You don't have to watch your story slip into silence. You are the keeper of a life that still has chapters to write, and the pen is still in your hand. But holding the pen isn't enough if you've forgotten how to write the truth of who you are. And that's where mistake 15 begins to rot the foundation. Emotional editing. You've started deleting parts of yourself from your own story, omitting the pain, the longing, the guilt, the strange desires you no longer dare to admit, not to others, but to yourself. You think protecting your peace means dulling your inner world, but memory is emotion's child, And without letting yourself feel, you cannot truly remember. You might recall facts, events, appointments, but they'll be skeletons without skin rooms, without color, names without meaning. And as you deaden those edges, mistake 16 grows in the silence, the erosion of self-talk. Once you encourage yourself, challenge yourself, reflect it in the mirror of your own mind, but now you mutter criticisms, avoid inner reflection, silence your questions, you're no longer narrating your own life. Your internal voice, once a compass, has become a whisper in a storm, and without that narration, your memories lose their anchor. Because your brain doesn't just record experiences, it records your interpretation of them. How you felt, what you believed, what you feared. And if you stop having a dialogue with your own soul, that record becomes blank, empty, erased. And that emptiness creates the perfect soil for mistake. 17, relying on technology to hold your memory for you. You store phone numbers, birthdays, reminders, addresses all outside your head thinking it's smart, efficient, modern. But the more you outsource, the less your brain practices the muscle of retention. And like any muscle, it shrinks. You become dependent not on others, but on machines. And if the power goes out, so do your memories. You lose names you used to know by heart, forget routes you once walked blindfolded, and you think the issue is age, but it's really disuse. You trained your brain to believe it didn't need to remember, it obeyed, it let go, and this letting go feeds mistake 18. Avoiding reflection. You stop telling stories, stop journaling, stop reviewing your day. You stop turning over what happened and why. You stop tracking how far you've come, what hurt you, what healed you. And in that stopping, your memory has no hooks, no layers, no reinforcement. It becomes a blur of tasks and small talk. A life skimmed over instead of lived through. Without reflection, your days dissolve into sameness. Your past becomes unreachable. Your identity begins to unravel because you haven't looked at it in years. And in that unraveling comes mistake 19, allowing shame to silence you. You forget something simple, a name, a bill, a date, and instead of laughing, you shrink, you retreat. You stop telling people, stop asking questions. You think silence is dignity, but it's actually decay. Because every time you hide a lapse, you teach yourself that. Forgetting is dangerous, shameful, something to be covered, not confronted. And when you hide from it, you stop engaging with it. You stop fighting. And shame becomes the shadow that grows longer than the memory itself. Then mistake 20 enters, disguised as kindness, always putting others first. You care for family, tend to friends, listen to problems, offer advice, but never pause to ask what you need to feel whole, awake, alive. You stop reading the books you love, stop pursuing the hobbies you miss, stop having conversations that you find stimulating. Your brain is fed on scraps while everyone else eats full meals. And soon your mind begins to wither, not from illness, but from neglect. Not because you're losing capacity, but because you've given it all away, and deep down you feel the loss. But mistake 21 tells you it's too late, that it's selfish to ask for more now, that you're too old to reclaim what was yours. And that lie is the one that locks the gate, that keeps your memory from coming back home. Yet still your brain is listening, watching, waiting. It is more plastic, more resilient, more willing than you've been led to believe. Even now, after decades of forgetting, neglecting, silencing, shrinking, your mind can still rebuild, reroute, rewire. But not if you wait, not if you sleepwalk through these years. Because mistake 22 is the worst lie of them all, believing there's plenty of time, that you can start next year, that you'll focus on your brain health when things settle down. But memory doesn't wait for your schedule to open. It doesn't care that you're busy or tired. It responds to now to choice, to effort. And if you keep putting it off, it will put you away into a fog. You won't even realize you're in until it's too thick to crawl out of. So take one step, even now in this moment. Say a memory out loud. Tell a story from your childhood. Recite a phone number. Learn something you've never touched before. Have a conversation that makes you uncomfortable. Walk a different route. Listen to a song you haven't heard in 40 years and let it hurt. Let it warm. Let it bring tears. Because your memory is not a tape recorder. It's a living organ. It needs nourishment, movement, emotion, light. It is a garden you thought had died, but the roots are still there, waiting. And as long as you're still breathing, it's not too late to remember how to remember. Because when you finally stop waiting for permission to reclaim your mind, you begin to notice what mistake 23 has been hiding all along the way. Chronic stress has hollowed out your memory from the inside. You've spent years walking around with clenched muscles, shallow breaths, worries about bills, about children, about illness, about time, and every one of those worries is a tax paid directly from your working memory, the short-term vault that helps you remember names, to-dos, directions, appointments. And stress sustained and silent isn't just a background hum. It's a thief stripping the insulation from your neural wires, making thoughts glitch, words disappear, emotions flare. And the worst part is you've gotten so used to this static that you think it's normal, but it's not. It's mistake 23, and it has cousins. Mistake 24 is overstimulation. The constant flood of noise screens, interruptions that have trained your brain to fear stillness, to crave distraction, to avoid focus. And you wonder why it's harder to read a book, harder to remember what you just watched, harder to sit in silence without reaching for a device. It's not your age, it's your mental environment filled with clutter, fragmentation, surface level attention. And that fragmentation leads directly to mistake 25. The addiction to convenience. You order instead of cooking, message instead of meeting, scan instead of reading, skip instead of learning. And all these shortcuts come at a cost. Your brain was designed to engage, to sweat a little. And the more you remove friction from your life, the more you remove growth. You no longer remember because you no longer wrestle, and the wrestling is where the memory lives. And then comes mistake 26, giving up your hands. You stop writing, stop crafting, stop fixing things. You live through thumbs and screens, but your hands were your first memory tools. The way you learned to tie shoes, build blocks, turn pages, braid hair, plant seeds. The hand speaks to the brain in a language more ancient than thought, and when you stop using it, really using it, your spatial memory fades. Your sensory memory dulls, your neural maps shrink. Pick up a pen, fold paper. Peel an orange with your eyes closed. Use your hands again, and your memory will stir. But it won't fully awaken if mistake 27 still has a grip on you. The belief that memory loss is a medical issue, and only that. Yes, Alzheimer's and dementia are real, serious, terrifying. But far more often, what you're calling memory loss is memory malnourishment. It's the cumulative result of years of micro-neglect, of not reading, of not listening, of not creating, of not sleeping, of not challenging yourself and believing it's disease instead of disuse allows you to let it grow unchecked. You must stop waiting for a diagnosis and start noticing the diagnosis. You've been living in your habits, your choices, your patterns, and that brings you face to face with mistake. 28, spiritual amnesia. The forgetting not of facts or names, but of purpose, of why you matter, of why you're still here. When you lose why your brain loses its compass. Your memories float without gravity, disconnected from meaning. The days feel like repetitions instead of revelations. And without purpose, your memory has no reason to store anything, because it's not about remembering everything. It's about remembering what matters. And when you live like nothing matters, your brain stops recording. Purpose is the flame. Memory is the smoke. Find the fire again. Even if it's small, even if it's painful, light it. And just when you think you've uncovered all the enemies of memory, mistake 29 appears wearing your own face in the mirror. Self-identification with decline. The moment you start saying, I have a bad memory, you've etched it into your identity. The moment you laugh nervously and say, I forget everything these days, your brain stops even trying. Because identity is a script the brain follows like gospel. You say you're forgetful and your brain follows orders. Stop saying it. Stop apologizing for it. Replace it with a challenge. Say I'm retraining my mind. Say I'm sharpening my recall. Say it until it becomes true. Because mistake 30. The final, most hidden one is this: believing memory fades from age, when in fact it fades from abandonment. It is not age that erases, it is inaction. You are not losing your mind. You are leaving it behind step by accident. But you can still turn around. You can still rebuild, reconnect, restore. You can sit at the edge of today and whisper a story from 50 years ago, and feel the room change as it comes back to life. You can relearn the constellations of your own thoughts, find clarity in the fog stand, with a memory that no longer hurts but honors, because memory isn't just recall, it's resurrection. It's proof that your life mattered, and it still does. And now that you've come this far, you must understand what very few people will ever say out loud, that memory isn't just about remembering. It's about returning to who you were before life started pruning you down into what was convenient, safe, expected. Because mistake 31 is the one nearly every person after 60 falls into. Without even realizing, you begin to let go of the parts of yourself that felt too young, too bold, too unnecessary. You stop singing, dancing, questioning, reading poetry aloud, laughing too hard in public. And with every piece of your former self, you set aside. You set aside the neurons that held them. Memory doesn't live in silence. It lives in volume and movement, in your voice when it gets too loud, your laughter when it bursts through your hands when they wave while talking. And if you've shrunk yourself even a little out of politeness or grief or age, your memory has shrunk with you. But don't panic, expand again. Let yourself grow wide, grow wild, grow strange, because mistake 32 is thinking you can't surprise yourself anymore, that everything worth knowing or feeling or trying has already happened. And that's the belief that flattens the future into repetition. And without a future, your memory begins to curl inward, backward, shrinking like a dying star. You must give your brain something to look forward to, not just events, but questions, mysteries, projects, something unfinished, something that scares you just enough, because mistake 33 is the gentle seduction of comfort, of knowing what each day will hold, of following a predictable rhythm. But while your heart may crave comfort, your brain only grows in discomfort. You need novelty like oxygen, even small ones, new routes, new words, new people, new flavors, new fears. When was the last time you felt unsure of yourself? That's not failure, it's fuel. And when you give your brain that fuel, it sparks, it rewires, it returns. But none of this matters if mistake 34 has settled in emotional numbing. Because life has hurt you, you've buried people, you've endured betrayal, you've suffered illnesses that shook your soul, and little by little you began to armor yourself, not realizing that the armor was blocking the very experiences your memory needs to stay alive. Memory is not stored in facts, it's stored in feeling. And you cannot feel selectively. You cannot silence sorrow without also silencing joy. You cannot avoid grief without also muting awe. If you want your memories back, you must walk naked into your emotions again. Let yourself cry. Let yourself ache. Let yourself be moved by music, by light, by someone's trembling voice. Let the world into your body again, because mistake 35 is thinking. Clarity is something that comes from fixing the mind, when really it comes from opening the heart. And maybe the most dangerous mistake of all, mistake 36, is believing no one will notice if you fade, that your forgetting is yours alone. But that's the final illusion. Your memory is not just for you, it is for the people who love you, for the stories only you can tell, for the wisdom that still lives only in your voice. Every time you reclaim a memory, you give someone else a piece of themselves too. Every time you remember a moment, you remind someone that it happened, that it mattered, that they mattered. And if you let go, that thread snaps not just for you, but for everyone holding it. You are not just remembering for your own mind. You are remembering for your children, your friends, your old neighbors, your spouse, your younger self. For the grandchild who doesn't yet know the courage it took for you to survive what you never talk about. For the person beside you who thinks they're too late to change. For the stranger who hears your story and feels less alone. You remember not to preserve the past, but to bless the present, to give it depth, meaning, dimension. And when you do that, when you speak, recall, laugh, teach, touch, you don't just slow forgetting. You reverse it. You stitch together what the years have torn. And if you've read this far, if your heart is burning just a little, if your breath has deepened, if something in your chest is remembering that you were never just a name in a file, you were a force, a fire, a living archive of unspoken miracles, then it's not too late. It never was, because the mind does not forget everything. It forgets what you no longer honor. So start honoring again. Start honoring you. Speak your name aloud. Say it with reverence. You are still here. You are still becoming. And if you dare to look directly into the mirror, into the blur of your own story, into the fog where names used to be, if you dare to stand there and fight, you will begin to see not just memories, but a soul that was never lost, only waiting.